everyone, Bandit here. Welcome back to the Bandit Flight Simmer channel, and today we're continuing on our flight around the world in the Diamond DA62. We're back in Lukla, Nepal, and here we are looking at the beautiful scenery in Lukla. And today we are going to be heading off out of Lukla down to Chittagong, I hope I pronounced that right, in Bangladesh. It's about a 500-mile trip today, and we're going to depart Lukla here, visual conditions, because there is no instrument procedures. I'll just precursor the flight by saying that in real life, I probably would never go to this airport because it is one of those airports where you need to have training to come in and out of here. And I'm pretty sure that the Diamond DA62 would never be certified to operate out of here. So, because this is a flight sim and we can have a little bit of fun, I decided to come up here and try it out. But in real life, if I was doing this trip, I probably would have just landed in Kathmandu and then continued on the next leg from Kathmandu down to Bangladesh. But we're having a bit of fun, and we're going to do the departure today out of Lukla. And then what I'm planning for today's trip is when I ran a sim brief flight plan, I couldn't run anything out of Lukla because there is no instrument procedures. So I ran it from Kathmandu down to Chittagong. So here's the flight plan. And what we're going to do is we're going to fly down and pick up the flight plan. We're going to fly visually from Lukla, which is right here, and fly down and pick up the flight plan down to Chittagong in Bangladesh. While we're here, looking at this beautiful scenery, we can talk a little bit about takeoff performance. And so if you get the Diamond operating handbook, pilot operating handbook, or the aircraft flight manual, and you can get that directly from the Diamond website, they're going to have a section on takeoff distance calculations and landing distance calculations, and they have charts for that. So I'll just give you a quick highlight of that, how it works. So starting in the takeoff distance section here, there's certain basic conditions that power levers will be both set to max, flaps will be up or takeoff. There's different charts for those two scenarios. We're going to use takeoff flap pretty much every time. Runway is dry, paved, and level, and that you're going to rotate at VR, and then your initial climb speed is going to be at V50 feet. And then they have correction factors based on headwind, tailwind, whether you're on a grass runway that's dry, wet, long grass, soft ground. You have uphill slope calculations. So if you have, for example, if you have a 1% uphill slope grade, you can add 10% for each 1% for the distance in the chart. And then you go to a chart and you figure out what you're going to be, what your takeoff distance is going to be. So for example, we're taking off at about 2,000 kilograms, and we're going to use, these are the conditions here. Takeoff flap set, max power is based on a dry paved level surface. These are our speeds: VR 76, V50 feet, 83 knots. And the weight for this table is right there. So for example, we're here in Nepal, and it's just over 9,000 feet, and let's say the temperature in the summer here is 20 degrees, and we would need a runway ground roll of almost 800 meters, which is, if we just do quick math, that's going to be about 2,500 feet, and the runway here is only 1,700 feet, so we do not have a long enough runway to take off without applying correction factors for the other aspects of the runway. And in this case, Diamond doesn't give you any downslope correction factors. And this is a 12-degree downslope, and I'm sure it's going to be enough to get us up to speed to take off in this short distance. But Diamond has not certified the aircraft for this condition, and I doubt they would make any special certification test flights to come up with a table for that. So technically, that's the main reason why I would probably never fly into here, because I cannot be 100% sure of what the takeoff distance is going to be required for this runway. And the other factor is that for these airports, you'd need special training to operate in and out of here. I doubt the government of Nepal is going to assume the liability of GA pilots just coming in here with whatever airplane they want. So So, but this is flight sim, and we can have a little bit of fun. We can do stuff like this in the sim, which is great because this is something I would probably never be able to do in real life. So anyway, without further ado, we're going to get set up and take off out of here, out of Nepal, and pick up our airway down to Chittagong. Another thing that I do with these charts is I can, without having to go to the charts for every takeoff and landing, I can go to the worst, look at the worst case scenario, and apply that for generally for every takeoff and landing. So if I take, this is the chart for flaps takeoff with max takeoff weight. And if I go here and I say, assume that almost most airports I'm going to take off out are less than 4,000 feet elevation, and let's say the max operating temperature would be 44 degrees. Well, if I look at here and I apply that scenario and I look at 770 meters, which is probably around 3,000 feet. And if I look at takeoff to clear a 50-foot obstacle at 1,300 meters, and that would be about, say, 4,500 feet, I can safely say that in a worst case scenario, if I'm taking off at a runway that's below 4,000 feet sea level and the temperature is below 40 degrees, with no other factors under consideration like a tailwind or anything like that, that I could safely take off and clear a 50-foot obstacle with that length of runway. So basically when I'm on the road and as long as those conditions apply, I have a runway that's 4,500 feet or longer and the temperature is less than 40 degrees and I'm not dealing with a tailwind or anything, I can safely say that without going to the charts that I'm not going to have any problems clearing a 50-foot obstacle at the end of the runway. So that's just a general application you can use for these charts. Now, if I run into any conditions with a shorter runway, higher elevation, I don't know if I would ever take off above 40 degrees. That's pretty hot, but anyway, you would dive into the charts and check the calculations and say you had to take off with a tailwind one day. Well, then definitely you go into the charts, you look that up, and you make sure that you have enough runway available for that situation. But in general, I can safely say that 4,500 feet is going to cover off 99.9% of the takeoffs that I do, and I shouldn't have an issue. And anytime there's a situation where I'm going to deal with the parameters outside that, then I'll go into the charts and have a look. So that's generally the procedure I would apply for takeoff distance calculations. And these charts are available in every pilot operating handbook for every aircraft. And they're very important to know how they work and how to do the calculations and when to apply them and stuff like that. So anyway, that's just a general, and they have the same thing for landing distance calculations too. And you can apply the same procedure for that as well. So anyway, without further ado, let's hop in the airplane. I'm going to hop in and have it all started up here. Let's just zoom in and take a look at it on the ramp here. Beautiful scenery in the mountains here in Nepal. And again, I had to use the simulated weather again because the Microsoft Flight Sim weather kept giving me the thunderstorms here and obscured in cloud. And even though in real life the weather in this area would maybe be isolated thunderstorms, and there might not really be a thunderstorm within 50 miles of here. So, but the simulator has a hard time depicting that. So I had to put in the simulated weather for scattered clouds here. Once we do get back on track here, I'll get back to the real world weather. So let's hop in. I'm going to have the airplane all started up and the flight plan loaded, and then we'll get up and on our way. Okay, so here we are. We got the plane all started up and the flight plan's loaded in. And you can just see it, the whole flight plan right here going down to Chittagong. And then the first part we're just going to do down to Churre as visual, and would simulate picking up our IFR clearance as we approach Churre here. So we're going to climb up to 11,500 feet, which should keep us above most of the terrain as we head down the valley out of Lukla here. Altimeter is set. The plane's already set for takeoff, so let's just taxi out to the runway and head on out. So parking brakes released. Now, like I said, the runway is short based on the tables here, but I'm sure that, well, I've done takeoffs with this airplane out of here, and with that downslope of 12 degrees, it's definitely adequate enough to help accelerate up to the takeoff speed. And there is no obstacles at the end of the runway. There is just a straight drop off, so we don't have to worry about clearing any obstacles. But we'll use as much runway as we can here. So we get lined up. Oop, a little bit oversensitive on the rudder here. So we'll set our parking brake. Just do a quick pre-takeoff check. So pumps are on, lights are good, flaps are set for takeoff, altimeter set, we got our altitude set, our GPS track is ready to go. We're going to take off, do a left turn down the valley here, and everything looks good. So let's get going. So release the parking brake, apply full power. Temperatures and pressures are good. There's that big drop off. We can look for about our 80 knot rotate speed. And no trouble reaching that, so 80 knots, rotate. Positive rate, gears coming up. Through 100 knots, flaps up. And we'll start a left turn and head down the valley as we continue our climb up to 11,500 feet. So we'll just get the airplane trimmed up here. And we'll just visually fly down the valley till we get above the terrain and we can pick up that track going to Churi. So I'll just get trimmed up for a nice climb here. We'll do a post-takeoff check. Gear is up, flaps are up. Shut off these boost pumps. Shut off our landing light. And temperatures and pressures are good. We'll set our climb power for 95%. And we'll just continue climbing down the valley here through 10,000 feet. And we can go back and have a look at that takeoff from the outside camera view. Okay, so we're level here on our VFR departure out of Lukla. We're just flying down the valley here. Visually 11,500 feet, that puts us above pretty much all the terrain. And once we get close to Churi, we will pick up our instrument flight plan or our airways down to Chittagong. So I'm just flying in heading select mode here, and we're just kind of paralleling the track to Churi just to stay over the valley here. And when we get close to Churi, what I would do is I would simulate calling up to air traffic control, tell them that I'm VFR out of Lukla, I'd like to pick up my airways to Chittagong at 13,000 feet. And if I zoom out on the map here, you can see our airway goes from Churi down to Bravo Romeo Tango. So when we get a little closer, we'll go through that procedure of picking up our IFR flight plan. Almost back on track here, so I might as well go to nav mode and just track that to Churi because we are going to be above the terrain. So I'll just select nav mode and we'll just fly that track down to Churi there. So I'll check in with you when we get a little closer to Churi and we'll pick up our airways down to Chittagong. Okay, so we're just coming up to Churi here, and at this point I would contact air traffic control and say that we're VFR out of Lukla 11.5, just north of Churi, and I'd like to request our airways, pick up our airways to Chittagong. And so let's say ATC cleared us to fly on a heading, so for radar vectors fly heading 160. So I'll select the heading and we'll dial up a heading of 160. And then on that heading, intercept the Romeo 344 airway to Bravo Romeo Tango, flight plan route, climb and maintain 13,000. So I would reback that clearance. So we're going to climb up to 13,000. So we'll dial that up. I'll select flight level change. We'll bring back our speed for the climb here. Do it at about 120. And we'll keep our power set at 90, that's fine. So we're going to climb up to 13,000 feet. We're on that heading. So now let's, with this airway, we want to intercept this airway here, but it's still active here. So we could just wait till we go beam Churi and it should cycle over. Or we can also go into our flight plan and we can cursor down to BRT, which is the next waypoint we want to go to. And we can hit menu and we can activate the leg to BRT. So we can go enter, activate, and now you can see that leg has become active. And it shows up active here. So we can just now stay on this heading until we intercept that airway. Once we are pretty close to intercepting that airway, we can activate nav again and then pick up our airway. So we'll do that as we get a little bit closer. You don't want to hit heading right now because by default the system is going to probably put us on a 45-degree intercept. So ATC cleared us to fly this heading until we get on the airway. So we'll just maintain heading select till we get pretty much on the airway, and then we'll select nav. Okay, so I'll check in with you as we intercept the airway. Okay, so we're just coming up to this airway and it's just starting to come in nicely here, so I'm just going to activate nav again. And then we'll turn on to the airway and then we'll be on our way to Chittagong. We're at 13,000 feet, got our cruise power 90% set, and temperatures, pressures are all looking good. And we'll just continue on this airway. So now when we expand our route, we look at the route here, it's takes this little dip down this way, and that could be for various reasons. There could be restricted airspace here or something like that we're not allowed to fly into, but it'd be nice if we could just go from BRT to DAC. So right now in the NXi, we're using the working title NXi mod for the G1000 here, and so let's say we requested to go from BRT to DAC to shorten our route a little bit, and let's say that ATC approved that. Well, if we go to the flight plan, normally what you would do is you would delete the points between those two waypoints, but if I do that, it's going to delete my whole flight plan. It's not able to do that. So the best way to do that is to continue flying your track to BRT, and right when you approach BRT, you can select direct to DAC to facilitate that clearance. So that's the only way I've come up with how to do it. I cannot modify my flight plan without deleting the entire flight plan and reloading a new flight plan to facilitate that. So the easiest way I found to do it is just continue flying your track to the waypoint that you want to link up to another waypoint, and then just go direct to the second waypoint once you get to that point. So that seems to work. It's just a way of eventually they might put in that feature where you can modify your flight plan to facilitate that, but right now you can't do it. So anyway, so once we get close to BRT, let's go through how we're gonna do that. Okay, so we're just going up to BRT here, and you can see it there as I zoom in, and we're 3.8 miles back, so I'm going to get set up to go direct to DAC here. So what I'm going to do is I'll just zoom out my flight plan here, and I will go select flight plan, and I will cursor down to DAC right there. And then I will select direct to, and that's the facility I want to go direct to. So I'm going to go enter, and I'm just going to wait on activating it till we hit pretty much zero distance on the BRT here. So we're just coming up to it, so I just ready to hit direct to, which will take us close up that part of the flight plan there. So I'm just watching the distance countdown here, and I'm just going to hit enter as soon as we hit that 0 miles. And it's making the switch over early here because of it does the turn here. So I'm going to hit enter now, and we're going to go direct to DAC. And you can see that's active. And if I get rid of the flight plan here and we range out, now we're going direct to DAC. So yeah, the reason it didn't go to 0 is because it anticipates it doesn't do a flyover turn, it does a flyby turn. So it didn't quite hit the 0. So that's why you want to be ready to hit enter as soon as it either flips to the next waypoint or you hit 0, depending on how much of an angle you're approaching it at. Okay, so now we're off to direct from that waypoint to Delta Alpha Charlie, and we'll continue on our flight plan to Chittagong from there. And look, weather looks pretty good. We're still in the simulated weather. I'm going to go back to the real world weather here momentarily. We'll see that in a bit. You might notice I'm getting a little screen tearing on the top here. Since Sim Update 5, that's been random occurrence in the sim. I'm not sure if it's because of the mod I'm using for the DA62 here, but it does occur occasionally, not all the time. Anyway, hopefully that goes away when we reload here. Okay, so I'll check in with you as we get a little closer to Delta Alpha Charlie. We'll go through a procedure that I'm going to show you next for what happens if I get a crash to desktop. So I'll see you there as we get closer to Delta Alpha Charlie. Okay, so we're still on our leg here, approaching Delta Alpha Charlie, VOR, and we're at 13,000 feet. And what I'm going to go over now is a procedure I use if I have a crash to desktop while I'm doing one of these flights. And if I have a crash to desktop, I don't want to have to go back and start all over again and redo it. So I have a procedure I use for picking up where I left off and then go from there. So as we're approaching DAC here, normally when you're running a flight plan, you're going to do fuel checks at waypoints and stuff like that. So I just would know my time at approaching DAC is going to be 7 minutes, 7:04 UTC. My fuel load, I got full ox tanks, and I got about 11 gallons in the main tanks. And then my altitude is 13,000 feet. And so, I would have noted that stuff on my flight plan as we're approaching DAC. And of course, when I want to crash a desktop, it's not going to give me one here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to exit out and come back to the sim, and then we'll go over the procedure I use for restarting from a point along my flight plan close where the crash a desktop happened. It could be just before or just after. Anyway, we'll go through that procedure here now. Okay, so we're back in the sim here, and we are at the world map page. I've got the aircraft selected, and we are going to load up our flight plan. So there's different ways you could do that. You can manually enter in your departure, arrival airport, and all your nav aids en route and waypoints en route. And then once you have the flight plan loaded, then you will go through the setup for that. But then the way I do it is because I have a flight plan in Navigraph. There's an option where you can just export your flight plan. So you choose export Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 plan. You save it somewhere on your computer, and then I've already done that. So basically, what I do is then you want to load that plan. So you just go down to More, and then you choose Load Save Plan. So when you select Load, it'll open up your window for File Manager, and you go find that plan, and then you load it. So I'll load the plan that I saved back up, and then we'll go through how to jump in the sim and get it set up. Okay, so I've loaded my flight plan in, And now I just need to do a few things with regards to the time. So we were about 7 UTC when it occurred, so I'll just go back to set that time in. So 7, go back to 7. That's pretty close, 7:07 UTC. And we will, oh no, so I want 7 a.m., sorry. There we go. There we go. So time is pretty good. That's roughly where we were. I'm going to set the weather. I'll put the live weather back on, and then we'll leave the live traffic on. And we want to check in our nav log, and we want to set the altitude. I had that set in my flight plan savings, but you can change it here, what altitude you want to be at. And then now I need to go find the point. So DAC is the point, so I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to set as departure. And that will be where we pick up our flight plan. So I've got everything loaded. I got the aircraft selected. Oh, another thing I need to do for the aircraft is select the fuel. So I need to go down to weight and balance. And I had about the left aux and the right aux were full. And I had about 11 gallons in the two other tanks there, so I'll set them roughly the same. There we go, so that's close to 11 gallons, full aux tank. So we'll go back to the world map. We are set up for DAC, so now all you do is hit fly, and we need to reset the time here again. I don't know why that changed. So just after 7, so there we go, and select fly. And we should spawn close to DAC. And then we'll just configure the aircraft, make sure it's all set up. So here we go. That looks pretty good. We're at altitude 12,000 feet for some reason. I don't know why I didn't put that in correctly, but that's fine. We'll deal with that. So I'll just hit ready to fly. We're back in the airplane. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take control of the airplane, set my power. So it's not perfect, but it gets you in the general direction. And I'm going to start a turn. You can see DAC on the chart there. So I'm just going to turn manually to that. And then once I get head in that direction, I'll just get my airplane all set up to get back on track. Okay, so I'm heading in the general direction. I got a climb going. And what I'm going to do now is just trim the airplane up. And I'm going to get the autopilot all set up. So go to autopilot, I'll engage the autopilot. I'll just put it in heading mode for now. I'll get a flight level change going. I'll get my altitude selected up to 13,000 feet. Re-engage flight level change, set a speed, go 120. So I'm in heading select, autopilot's engaged, flight level change up to 13,000. We're just right of the track I want to be on, so I will just alter my heading just to get me back on track there. Or I could just select nav at this point and it'll re-intercept that track. So now I'll check everything over. So and I'm going to get rid of that ATC. And so there we go. I'm getting back on track. We're climbing up to 13,000 feet. Altimeter 2992 is set. We'll just check our configuration. Flaps are up. Gear is up. We got everything set up. Pitot heat's on. And lights are good. Position and strobe. Everything looks pretty good. I'll set my power for 90% for the cruise. As we level off here, and the autopilot set, GPS, autopilot alt. So now we're back on our track, and we can just see that our flight plan is loaded correctly. The remainder of our flight plan is in there from DAC off to Chittagong there, and so it looks all good. And then if you need to change your transponder, you can set that up. Any other setup items you need to take care of, and then we're off on our way. So that's usually what I do to get going back in the sim after I've had a crash at desktop, because we had just covered about 3.5 hours worth of flying and I don't want to have to repeat all that. So this is a good procedure that I use for getting back on track after the computer has crashed. And with flight sim up, the latest flight sim update, I'm getting them more frequently. Not a lot, but they do happen occasionally. So anyway, that's a procedure you can use to get going again on your flight, especially when you're doing these long flights. Okay, so I'll check in with you a little bit as we get a little bit closer here, and we're going to set up for the approach into Chittagong. We're back in the real world weather here, and looks pretty good. Let's put up our winds and see what our winds are looking like. So we go to PFD options, wind, option 3, and we got a little bit of a headwind there, so not too bad. Okay, so I'll check in with you when we get a little bit closer, probably up to Admiral here, and we'll load up an approach for coming into Chittagong. Okay, so we're cruising along. Let's go over the approach we're going to do coming into Chittagong here. And the airport's called Chittagong, Bangladesh. And we're going to be doing a VOR approach coming in here today, and it's something a little bit different. It's VOR with an arc. And so we're coming in on this, roughly this airway here. We're going to pick up this arc and fly the VOR approach into Chittagong. I just looked at the weather. It's calm winds right now and just some scattered cloud. And the low visibility, it's a little bit hazy, but shouldn't be no problem getting in on the VOR approach. So what we're going to do is load this approach up, and then we're going to do our descent, come in on this arc transition, and then fly the approach. Now you'll notice this is actually a VOR approach. It's not a GPS approach. So we can use the GPS to facilitate flying this approach, but we need to have the VOR loaded up, and that's our primary instrument for flying this approach. And you can see that it just has an MDA. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a minimum descent altitude. So we're going to be descending once we're past the FAF here and leveling off at that MDA altitude and flying in, as opposed to flying a vertical guided approach like with a 3-degree glide slope. That's not coded in for this approach when we load it up. So we're going to have to do basically what's called a dive and drive, where we're going to dive down to the minimum descent altitude and then drive it in at that altitude to the runway. So that's what we're going to be doing. And so let's load that approach up and then get ready for coming into the airport here. So if I go to the GPS screen here, and we'll go to procedures, and we'll select approach, and we're going to be doing the VOR 23, and you see there's 2 VOR 23s, and that's because there's 2 approaches. We're going to be doing the VOR 23 with the arcing transition. There's also one with a procedure turn transition. So I think it's the first one here. So we will cursor down to VOR 23, hit enter, yeah, and then we're going to be coming in via Onika, enter. And we can set our minimums of 520, so we can turn that on. So we'll set Barrow, we'll put in 520 while we're here. And then we will load that approach. And then we'll have that approach loaded in. And we'll go back to close the procedure page, flight plan there. Now you can see the extra waypoints here, and we won't be able to see that till we get a little bit closer and can zoom in. Now you also see we have a top of descent and a bottom of descent point. And if we go to the approach here, and you can see we're back using the VNAV for the NXi, and you can see 3,500 feet is the target altitude for VNAV. And if we go to flight plan here, and you can see it's got a flight plan, it's looking for that waypoint there at 3,500 feet. And it shows our top of descent is in 16 minutes. And that's going to be the descent profile to get down to that altitude. So we'll use VNAV to get down to that altitude. And you can see on the chart here, this is the waypoint that they're targeting right here. And you can see the 3,500 feet is the target altitude. So, and then once we're on the arc, we can go down to 1,500 feet. And that's still our FAF point here, or this fix here. and then from there on we can descend down to our minimum descent altitude once we're inbound. So another thing I need to do now is we need to tune the VOR, because that's going to be our primary instrument, 13.4. So if I go to the PFD page here, we go to our nav, and I will dial in 13.4. So 13.4, and we will set that up, and there's Charlie Tango Golf. That is the VOR. So that's ready to go. We also need to put it on a needle here. So we'll go to our PFD options. We'll put it on bearing 1, and we'll choose, there we go. So that now shows that CTG nav1 needle here is active, and that shows our DME as well. So that's set up. So now we have, that's our primary instrument now for flying this. We're going to use the GPS to fly it, but we're relying on the primary instrument to fly this approach. I can also set the course for that. So the inbound course, I can do that in the CDI just as a backup. So I'll select heading mode here. I'll center my heading bug. I'll select heading mode for now, and then we can go change our CDI to course, and then we can dial up our course of 266. Sorry, 226 is our inbound. So that's ready to go as our primary instrument if we need it. We'll use the GPS, but we'll have this set up just in case we need to. We don't have the GPS working properly, and we can use this as our primary nav source here. So I'll just set that up. It's pretty slow on here. I'm going to do it on my Class Echo device. It's a little faster. There we go. So 226. So that's set up for our inbound track when we need it. And I'll go back to the CDI, to nav here, and we'll go back and select nav, and we'll get back on track. Okay, so now we'll go over how we're going to do the approach, and I'll brief that in a moment as we get closer to the top of descent, and then we'll start our descent into Chittagong. Okay, so we just came within range of ATIS, I think. So we got our fuel transfers complete. So left aux fuel is empty, right aux fuel is empty. Our main tanks are full. We will shut off our aux pumps here, and yeah, that looks good. So let's get the ATIS and see. We're using the real world weather again. So let's get the ATIS and see what the weather is. Okay, so winds are calm, and the temperature is 27,297,1, 900 feet ceiling and 3 miles visibility in rain, and they're using runway 5. So we can switch it over to 5. It's a very similar approach. So what I'll do is let's go to the procedure here, and we'll choose select approach, and we'll go down to the VOR 5 and enter, and we're coming in via Chittagong or via Nika again, so we'll select enter. We'll check the barrel minimums for that approach, and it's 500 feet, and we'll load that approach instead. Okay, so that's loaded the new approach, and we're just coming up to, so we still have our top of descent. It's still VNAV. It's going to be going to the same point at 3,500 feet, and so that looks good. So what we'll do is we're coming up to the top of descent here, and we're going to start our descent here momentarily, and I'll just show you this approach real quick. It's very similar. It's coming in by the same airway, and we're going to do the arc this way and come in for runway 5. And we're going to have to change our course of 055, so I'll do that on my Class Echo device here. So I'll just change my course 055 in case we need it. And what I'm going to do, I'm not going to fly the approach. We can use VNAV to do this portion of the descent. So basically I'm just going to do it myself using vertical speed. And if I go to the flight plan, it's basically doing about 1,000 foot per minute descent to reach that point at 3,500 feet. We're coming up to it here momentarily. You can just see it coming up here. So what I'll do is I will, when we hit the top descent, I'll just do a vertical speed descent at 1,000 feet per minute to 3,500 feet for that approach. Okay, so I'll check in with you as we start the descent. Okay, so we're just coming up to the top of descent. I'm going to dial down my altitude to 3,500 feet. I'll engage vertical speed, 1,000 foot per minute descent, and I'll bring my power back just to keep my speed from building up too much. I'll set about 70%. And there we go. So we started our descent, and we'll see how close we get to leveling off at 3,500 feet. So we'll just go through this approach here. So we're coming in on the airway here. We're trying to target here for 3,500 feet. Then when we get on the arc, we can descend down to 1,500 feet. And then from the 9-mile fix here, we can come in at descend down to 1,000 feet till 6 miles. And then from 6, we can descend down to our minimum descent altitude of 500 feet. This is based on 500 foot ceiling, so 500 foot MDA. So the ceiling is supposed to be 900 feet, so we should be below. And the missed approach point is at the VOR, so we should be able to, with the visibility, we should be able to see the runway at an appropriate time to continue our descent. So to do our descent from 500 feet, you want to be visual with the threshold of the runway for 3-degree glide slope about 300 feet per nautical mile. So we want to be visual at about probably 1.7 miles back to do a safe 3-degree glide path descent from, and with the visibility we should be able to facilitate that. So that's going to be the approach we're going to be flying. We have the nav aid set, it's tuned and identified, and we have the course set if we need it. We're going to use the VOR or the GPS to fly the arc. It's a 10 DME arc, and we'll use that to facilitate flying the arc. We can do it without the GPS, but we have the GPS, we might as well use it, and it's set up as the NXi has this all set up to fly these arcs very nicely, so we might as well use that. So everything looks good. Coming in on the descent here, I'll just range out of here a little bit, and you can see the arc here. Now, here's something that I've seen on. I've done a couple of arc approaches, and this could be just a problem with the mod here for the NXi, but it's got this funny little, almost like a procedure turn transition. It should just arc onto here. Now, when we get closer, I've noticed that it does correct itself and it does do the correct transition, so we'll see what happens. So we do have the VOR set up ready to go, so we can make the transition ourselves if we need to, but in case it doesn't, I'll fix it, but that's not how you would transition onto the final approach course. It should just do a nice smooth turn here, and hopefully that'll fix itself when we get a little closer. But if it doesn't, we'll be ready to take over and just do it ourselves. So we're coming through 10,000 feet. I'm going to get my landing light on here, and we're just monitoring our speed's good, and we'll just monitor the descent here. We're going to try to be, we can be at or above 3,500 feet here. We don't need to be right at 3,500 feet, but 3,500 feet is the lowest we can go for now. So on the plate it says the transition altitude is 4,000 feet, so we need to set that before we hit 3,500 feet as well to put our barrel in. And they said it was 2,971, so we'll set that when we get a little lower. Okay, so I'll check in with you as we level off approaching the arc. We look out the weather, you can see some rain showers. Maybe that's what's over the airfield right now. So back in the real world weather here, so not an issue. We do have the ability now to shoot an approach at this airport, so that's what we're going to do. Okay, I'll check in with you as we start turning onto the arc here. Okay, so we're coming up to the arc here. The weather looks pretty good actually. The airport should be right around here somewhere. So I think whatever rain shower was in the area has moved off. Still see rain showers around the area, so should be no problem for the approach, but we'll continue on the VOR approach. And we're just coming up to level off here momentarily at 3,500 feet. So we need to set our altimeter. So let's go to flight options. We're going to go back to, and then we'll put in our altimeter now of 2971, I think they said it was. And you could just hit barrel on your thing. So 2972. And we got 1,000 feet to go. We're going to level off, and that's just before we come up to the turn here. So that 1,000 foot per minute descent worked out pretty good. You can see the arc looks good for the waypoints, but we do have this funny little entry onto the final portion that's still displayed. So hopefully that goes away. If not, we'll do it ourselves. So now we're going to cross-check with the needle here that we should be transitioning onto the arc, and we should be flying DME. We should be flying a 10 DME arc, so we should see 10 DME all the way through the arc procedure as the needle switches around here. So we'll monitor that, but we'll let the GPS just fly the procedure. So coming up to 3,500 feet, pretty good. Just going to add a little bit of power, about 70%, just to keep our speed from decaying too much. And then once we're established on the arc, we'll just do a vertical speed descent down to 1,500 feet. So everything looks good. We're going to transition onto the arc here, so we can watch that over here. So you see it doesn't fly over the waypoints. They use a nice flyby technique here, where it just calculates a turn to fly by to intercept onto the next track there. So that's a nice feature of this NXi update. It does a really nice job of that. So we're transitioning onto the arc now. We're by that waypoint, so once we're established on the arc, we can descend down to 1,500 feet. So we'll do that as soon as we're established. I'll just range out here and watch this as we come around the arc. So you can see now we're coming up on 10 miles, so that looks pretty good. There's our needle still pointing. So basically the GPS is going to fly the arc, and we should be maintaining the 10 mile distance on this arc all the way around. And you can see the track is going to continuously change as it's adjusting to fly the arc. So it's doing a pretty good job. So now let's reset our altitude to 1,500 feet, and we'll go vertical speed, nose down. We don't need to go down very fast here. We can go down about 600 feet per minute, and we will get down to our next altitude of 1,500 feet here. I'll just let the speed build up here. That's fine. Still got a ways to go. And you can see the VNAV is still calculating top of descent and bottom descent for the next altitude, and it has a target of 1,500 feet. So we could have used VNAV, but I'm just going to manually fly using vertical speed here. And so if by this waypoint it doesn't fix this little entry that is calculated here, if it doesn't come up with a proper entry onto the final portion, what I'll do is I'll just heading select it, and then we will manually fly, and then we'll bring up the VOR course, change the CDI to VOR, and then we'll just manually fly, and then select nav again once we're on course on the inbound here. Hopefully it'll switch. I had one before where I was doing a arc approach, and it did correct itself, so we'll see what happens here. This is probably a bug. I think I'll just send this to the working title group just to show them how it's not correctly calculating the transition from the arc onto final here. So I'm going to have my heading bug centered and ready to select it in case I need to. Got 1,000 feet to go. Still maintaining the 10 DME arc here, so everything looks good. I have my inbound course set in case we need to switch over. Just looking, the airport should be over here somewhere. It's right around here. .500 feet to go, altimeter is set. We've got our minimum set. Okay, so we'll see what happens here once we get to this waypoint. And if it doesn't fix it, we'll heading select it, and then we'll just transition on to the final approach ourselves. No, looks like it's going to continue on that. I'm just going to take a screenshot here so I can send it to the working title guys here. And so what I'll do now is I'll select my heading and I'll go heading select. And then what I'll do is I'll heading select it onto final here. And I'll just stay on the arc myself. So I'll switch my CDI up. We have now our VOR course 055 set. So I'll just continue on the 10 DME arc until we get down to on our course here, and then I'll activate nav to fly the course inbound. So I'm just going to use heading to keep us going in the turn here. Make the transition myself. And you could fly the whole VOR like this with just the VOR needles. You don't need to have the GPS to fly the arc. You could just use heading select and fly the arc yourself and just maintain on the 10 DME fix. So as we see the track bar start to come in here, so what I'll do now is I'll select nav, and then we should now make the turn on to intercept our inbound track. Once we're established inbound inside 9 DME, I can descend to 1,000 feet. So I'm going to put 1,000 feet in my window here and get ready to vertical speed it down as soon as we hit 9 miles. So the NXi has some great options, and you can see it still has some bugs in it. So you have to be ready to come up with a backup to when the GPS doesn't work properly. So anyway, so now we're just going to fly this the old-fashioned way. So we're out inside 9, so I'm going to vertical speed it down now to put down at about 1,000 feet per minute, or no, yeah, go down to about 800 feet per minute, and we'll go down to 1,000 feet. Once we're inside 6, we can go down to our minimums of 500 feet. I'll start bringing the speed back, and I'm going to throw my boost pumps on. And I'm going to get my gear down, and I'll bring the power back a little bit. Okay, set about 30%. And gear is down. Get below 136. We can select our approach flap. And we're just leveling off at 1,000 feet. And then we maintain that till 6 miles. I'll bring the power up a little bit so we don't get too slow. There's the airport ahead of us. So once we're at 6 miles, I can go down to our minimums of 500 feet. So I'll select that. So we're altitude captured. So I'll select 500 feet. And now we're at 6 miles. I'll go vertical speed. Go nose down, about 600 feet per minute. And we'll just do a quick pre-landing check. So gear is down, flaps are takeoff, landing flap to go. We got our fuel pumps on, landing lights on. Temperature pressures are all looking good, speed's good. I'll let it bleed off as we level off. And we're inbound, and we're looking, we want to be about probably 3 miles back to start our final approach. So looking pretty good. We're going to level off here. We got the runway in sight. It's not quite lined up with the runway. It's just an offset VOR approach, which is fine. And so we'll just maneuver in the final portion here to line up with the runway. So everything looks good. Leveling off at 500 feet. Altitude's captured. We have the runway visual. And so I'm just going to disengage the autopilot now, and I'm going to hand fly to line up. And we'll bring our power back, get our speed back. Below 119, we'll put in our final flap. There's the VASIs coming in, and we're getting on our glide path. Landing flaps selected. So gears down, flaps are down. Slow to about 100 knots. And landing's assured, so we'll continue. And I'll start letting the speed bleed off. Power's coming back. And touchdown. And welcome to Chittagong, Bangladesh. And we'll pull off at the right here. I'll just pull up and park on the ramp here. Suppose we can park where the ground handling guys are. Oh, he lost one of his wands there. So we'll pull in, stop, set the parking brake. We'll bring our flaps up. Get our landing light off, strobe light off, boost pumps off, and we'll just shut down the engines. There we go. Welcome to Chittagong. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's flight. We saw lots of different things, some new stuff with the NXi here, and a way how we can deal with some of the issues that don't work correctly on the NXi, because it's not 100%. It's still a work in progress. So we saw the Arcing VOR approach, the transition to actually using the VOR, the standard VOR instrumentation to fly the approach, and we also saw how to deal with a crash to desktop in case you want to restart your flight halfway. And yeah, we're back on our trip around the world using the real world weather, and we're in Chittagong in Bangladesh. And not sure where we're going to go on our next leg, but hope you enjoyed today's flight. Saw lots of different things, and it was certainly an interesting flight for me to do today. Thanks for joining me, and if you like today's content, make sure you hit the like button. Really appreciate it. And if you'd like to see more flights like this and tutorials and flights around the world in the DA62, sign up for a subscription and sign up for notifications, and you'll see the flights when they pop up in the future. thanks again for joining me. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. Bandit out.